And then the secretary is finishing up another event, so we will just keep an eye out for him. But thank you all for joining us for the Vote 2020 workshop. We are going to begin shortly.
Hello?
Hi, Secretary
Hi.
Simon. How are
How are
you?
you?
Good. Well, the
See you.
gang's all here. So
Excellent.
without further delay, we are going to get started.
Let's do it.
All right. So let me just get to the next slide. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Council for Men Sons of African Heritage. My name is Amber Jones, and I am grateful to be our outreach coordinator for the council, and really excited to introduce you all today to our organization and to this important event to talk more about voting in 2020. We have a super fun and informative workshop for you all today with our colleagues from the Office of the Secretary of State. And so we're really excited to have a really important conversation about elections here in 2020. As you know, the stakes have never been as high as they have been this year, and also navigating a global health crisis such as this pandemic, making sure that we are getting important information, accurate, reliable information about how to access the vote in 2020 is paramount for our civic engagement. And so we want to do our part as a state agency, as an entity that is making sure that our communities of African heritage can effectively participate in the political processes in the state, to make sure that we are doing our part to make sure that information is accessible to you, that you can share with your friends, your family, your loved ones, your neighbors, your coworkers, your church members, your mosque members, everyone today. And so before we get started, I want to give our chair, Naria Hughes, some time to also give some welcome remarks on behalf of the council. I'm gonna stop the screen share for a moment so that you can see her face.
All right, can you all hear me okay? We're good. I see heads nodding, so. Well, welcome. So I guess it's afternoon now. I've been on Zoom since 8 o'clock, so you just never know if it's afternoon or morning still, but glad that you all can join us. I am, as Amber Jones said, I'm Naria Hughes, the chair for the Council of Minnesotans of African Heritage. Just want to welcome you and encourage you to, one, I'm glad that you attended this voter registration workshop, But the other piece that I would encourage is to make sure whatever you do to vote. We know that a couple nights ago, the presidential debate was interesting. I'll say that because we're live, but despite what we saw, despite what we heard, and despite just the activity that happened live nationally, we still need to get out and vote. Our voices need to be heard. You can't make a change if you're not being a part of the movement, so to speak, and making sure that your voice does matter. And so I would just leave you with whatever you do, have a plan to vote and get out there and vote. So thank you all for attending this workshop today. Turn it back over to you, Amber.
Thank you so much to our Chair Hughes. So we are really excited for today's program. As I mentioned, we are joined by our colleagues with the Secretary of State's office who conduct our elections here in the state of Minnesota. Such important work. And we are very, very grateful to have with us our very own Secretary of State, Steve Simon. So I'm going to take some time to introduce you all to our Secretary of State, and then he is going to deliver a welcome as well. So Steve Simon is Minnesota's 22nd Secretary of State. He was sworn into office on January 5th, 2015, and as Minnesota's Chief Elections Administrator, pledged in his inaugural address to, quote, work with anyone of any political affiliation from any part of our state, end quote, to protect, defend, and strengthen the right to vote in Minnesota. As Secretary of State, he partners with township, city, and county officials to organize elections on behalf of Minnesota's nearly 4 million eligible voters and to ensure that the election system is fair. His goals as Minnesota's Secretary of State are straightforward: expand access to voting, remove barriers to voting, make business services as streamlined as possible, strengthen protections for victims of domestic violence, and most importantly, be a Secretary of State for all Minnesotans. Before being elected Minnesota's Secretary of State, Simon served in the Minnesota House of Representatives for 10 years, representing the communities of St. Louis Park and Hopkins. Simon also served as Assistant Attorney General of Minnesota and worked as a lawyer in private practice for several years. Simon grew up in St. Louis Park and Hopkins. He graduated with a BA in political science from Tufts and earned a JD from the University of Minnesota Law School. Simon and his wife live in Hopkins with their 2 children and rescue dog Hugo. So once again, we are super, super excited to have you with us, Secretary. And please just give us what we need to hear so that we are empowered to vote. We are so excited to have you. Thank you. You're on mute.
Mute. Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay, take 2. I was going to say thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I want to thank you. I want to thank the council for this opportunity. 33 days out from what is a momentous election. Some say one of the most important, if not the most important in 100 years. That could very well be true. And so I just want to say a few words about the elections from our perspective. Now, look, we do a lot of things in the Office of Secretary of State. We wear a lot of hats. There's no question that what gets the most attention, the most scrutiny, the most interest, especially now, is the elections hat. And so I like to say that we're in the democracy business. And it's a heck of a time to be in the democracy business. I'm sure you'll agree, because all elections are intense. Presidential elections are even more intense. But now you got to layer on top of that the fact that we're doing this in the middle of a once in a century pandemic. That has created a lot of challenges. And look, this is no different than any other area in our lives. The pandemic has created challenges for our health, obviously, our jobs, our schools, and for our democracy as well. We're just going to have to do things a little bit differently. With me here today are 2 people from our office. I'm really their opening act. So think of me as the scrappy local band opening for the big headliner. But we have with us Michael Wall. Give a wave, Michael. And then we have Nasser Musa, who is familiar to many of you, I suspect, because of the longstanding involvement and leadership within the council. So let me just tell you a little bit from our perspective, some of the tricks and traps and sort of the thinking going into this election. No big surprise. We have to treat this election at least partly as a public health issue. And let me just tell you a little math that got our attention early on as we were thinking about this. You didn't think there would be math this close to lunch, but there's a little bit of math, and it's easy math, so don't worry. Here's the math. We have about 3,000 polling places in Minnesota, 3,000. We're expecting about 3 million voters in Minnesota. That math works out pretty well. That's 1,000 to 1, about 1,000 people for every polling place, 1,000 voters, give or take. You know, it's a rough average. It's a starting place. But from a public health standpoint, it's a good idea to get that number down. We're not saying, and no one is saying, it's a death trap, run for your lives. We're not saying that. The CDC has comments on that. If you go to their website right now, they have guidance on polling places. And what they say is pretty common sense. They say, look, like any place where you'd have 1,000 people in a closed space over a period of a few hours, you just got to be sensible about it. And so as a result of that, I think people all over the country have taken notice. There was a national poll a while back from the Pew Survey Research Group that showed 66% of Americans say that they would be uncomfortable. That's the exact term that was in the poll, uncomfortable going to a polling place during a pandemic. So we got to listen to what people are trying to tell us. And that's why we're talking about different avenues available to folks. So we're really emphasizing to people this year in particular that they should strongly consider voting from home this year. You don't have to. Every method of voting is just as legitimate and worthy as the other. But this year, that's something that folks should take a look at and think about strongly. It's easy to do. You just go to a website. It's our website, mnvotes.org. And the ballot takes you about 5 minutes, and the ballot will come to you in the mail. You can register online if you're not registered, and then have that thing come to you in the mail. And, you know, normally the reason to do that, and the reason why it was already gaining popularity even in 2018, was comfort and convenience, right? You can vote with your feet up. You can vote while you're watching TV. You can vote while you're folding laundry, whatever you're doing. You can put the ballot down for a day or 2 or 10 and pick it up again. But this year, there's more than that going on. People are choosing this option because they just want to minimize their own risk. And maybe most importantly, we are hearing a ton of people saying that they're doing it because of kind of a public service aspect, in the sense that every person who votes from home is making the polling place just a little bit safer for all the folks who choose that option, which will be the majority of people, no question about it. But so that's another consideration too. And so far, the numbers have been off the charts. We announced last week that we topped the 1 million mark. So we're over 1 million people in Minnesota that have chosen to vote from home. To put that in perspective, last time around, it was like somewhere over 200,000. It's already, with 33 days, 1 million. It'll probably land somewhere around 1.2 million. Remember I said earlier, we're expecting about 3 million voters. You can do that math. So we're talking about like over a third, maybe close to 40%. I don't know. And that means it's a win-win for the people who do it. They have that security. For the people who choose to do the more traditional way in the polls, it means there are fewer people there. Instead of 1,000, you're looking at maybe 600 on average, which is a good thing. So it's a win-win. So we're talking about that a lot. I get a lot of questions, you can imagine, saying, hey, what about the post office? I mean, are you still telling people that this is a good idea in light of what we're seeing and reading about postal delays? And my answer is yes. Am I disturbed by those reports about the Postal Service? Absolutely. But I know that in Minnesota, we have workarounds. We have ways to get around even some of the delays. For example, I urge everyone to order the ballot now. Don't wait till late October. Don't wait till Halloween, please, because that's just going to burden. There you go. Nice. Thank you. You're just going to burden people when they're most slammed. Second, I'm telling people, you know, once you're comfortable with your choices, and only you can answer that question, get the ballot in. You know, of course, everyone's entitled to wait till Election Day, but maybe you're the kind of voter who knows a week out or 10 days out who you're going to vote for, and probably nothing's going to change your mind. So just get it in then. Third, and this is the one thing I got to say, if you remember nothing of what I said today, if it's just a blur to you, can't even remember my name, please remember this one thing. There is a new rule this year and this year only for 2020, which is kind of a game changer. Here's the rule. This year and this year only, by court order, because of some litigation that was settled, by court order this year, you don't have to get the ballot in by election day. It's a more generous rule. The rule this year is you can postmark it by election day. You can pop that thing in the mail on Tuesday, November 3rd. And if it bears a postmark of November 3rd or earlier, you're good to go as long as it gets there 1 week later. So if you get it in the mail by Tuesday, November 3rd, which is election day, and it gets there by Tuesday, November 10th, you're good to go. Now, if it gets there Wednesday, the 11th, you're not. It's a spoiled ballot. It will not be counted. But one way to look at that is every Minnesotan now has an automatic 10 or 7-day cushion, a 7-day period automatically. It can't ever be lower than that to get the thing from point A to point B. And look, there are some folks on this meeting who might say, I'm still a little queasy about even 7 days. And that's fine. You can always drop it in the mail earlier, a day earlier or a week earlier. All the more reason to get it in earlier. I just want to remind people too that just because you get it by mail to your home doesn't mean that's the way you got to get it back. We've always had the rule. Oh, this is not new for 2020. We've always had it. You can always hand deliver it to the address that's in the materials. Or better yet, in most circumstances, you can have someone you know or trust hand deliver it for you. And then finally, I just want to remind folks on this issue when it comes to the post office, we have on our website, mnvotes.org, a ballot tracking function. It's awesome. People love it. I used it in the primary because I voted that way. You go to that ballot tracker function, you type in your info, and you can know the particular day that it arrived. You don't have to put that thing in the mailbox and say a prayer, or put that thing in the mailbox and wonder, gee, well, here goes. I sure hope they get it. You can know for sure that they got it and the particular day that they got it. Huge peace of mind for folks. So that's why I say, despite the headlines about the post office, we've got the tools in Minnesota to get around that if we all have a plan to vote. If we all think about it, the law is more forgiving and generous this year because of some court orders and some laws that were passed in the legislature, but we can do this. We got this. Of course, if you vote in the polling place, that is going to be as safe as possible. We had a good dress rehearsal in the primary in August, and we are going to do for the general what we did in the primary, which is we have paid for and we are distributing to all 3,000 polling places high-grade masks, almost surgical grade, for all of the poll workers. We'll have disposable masks for the voters. We'll have hand sanitizer and pumps and wipes and rules that we worked on with the Department of Health that govern everything from the use of pens to social distancing to the automatic wipe down of all the polling surfaces after the use by the voters. So we feel good about that option. One more thing before I hand it over to your headliners today, and that is a favor I have to ask for everyone on this call. A personal favor, please. Remember how I said there's that new rule, the one thing I wanted you to remember, the 7-day rule? Well, that means by definition, we're not going to know 100% of the results for a week. Okay? We'll know the vast majority beforehand, but every last vote won't be in for a week. And I just want you to have your help. Every one of you on this meeting is an opinion leader or a thought leader in your circle. It could be a professional circle, neighborhood, family, friends, whatever. You're on this because you're plugged in, you're interested, you're involved, and people are going to look to you. And during that week after the election, when people see that 100% of votes aren't counted, I hope you'll help me in spreading the word that that is literally by design. It's not somebody's screw up. It's not somebody was lazy or did poor planning. In a normal year, you'd say that. You'd say, well, what's going on here? It's election night. Why are we waiting until 2 days or 4 days or whatever? Who screwed up? It's not what's going on. Literally by design of the legislature and by design of the courts this year. Nobody's stealing anything, rigging anything, hiding anything. This is the deal this year. Like so much else we've had to adapt to this year. And then the other thing I just want to caution, and this is good news, is just because we're not going to get 100% in by until a week doesn't mean that we're all going to be standing around wondering who won all the elections. That's not the case. I strongly suspect, I predict that the vast number of contests, we're going to know the winner either on election night or very shortly after that. There are a lot of reasons for that. We're going to be reporting the number of outstanding absentee ballots. So you'll be able to do the math in your head. Like if candidate A is ahead by 1,000 votes on election night, and you know there are only 700 left to count, we don't know when they're going to come in over the next 7 days, but there are only 700. Well, you can do the math right there. You can call it for candidate A. You know she's won. because even if all the other 700 come in for her opponent, mathematically she's won. We won't know how much she's won by, a lot or a little, but we'll know she's won. And I think most races are going to be like that, not the nail biters where we're waiting till day 7. So that's my quick pitch. I'm an optimist about this, despite some of the gloomy scenarios. I really am. But it's important that week after the election that we not let disinformation or conspiracy theories or other things take hold, where because it's not what we're normally used to, people jump to conclusions about what's going on, conclusions that aren't based on the facts. So that's my favor, is if you could just help in your own circles and communities in just spreading the word that this is the deal this year. This is not anyone hijacking the system or anything like that. So thank you for your time and attention. I don't want to steal any more time from Nasser and Michael. I really appreciate this opportunity, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Secretary Simon. And I just really appreciate one of the major messages you're saying is that Minnesota is built for this. Like, we are built for this. We have a record. We have a history of high voter turnout, of expanding access to the vote, to be able to take in this groundswell of early voting, mail-in voting, just different ways for people to get their ballot in, and to be able to trust that our state and our system is built for this. We have the infrastructure, is really important for people. So thank you for that message. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I am fired up and ready to go. Are you all fired up and ready to go? Awesome. So we are going to transition into our presentation with our amazing colleagues also from the Secretary of State's office. So I'm going to pull up their slides. Oh, nope, that's fine. I'll just read their bios real quick for sake of presentation. So we are going to have our workshop come from two of our colleagues. The first is Nasser Musa, who is the Voter Outreach Director at the Secretary of State's office. And he directs voter outreach and civic engagement efforts of the office in partnership with community organizations, nonprofits, educational institutions, and businesses. Nasser implements statewide voter outreach activities, including voter education and voter registration assistance, especially communities that vote at rates below the average. Nasser was previously at the Community Action Partnership of Ramsey and Washington counties, where he managed asset development programs, including providing technical assistance for small businesses, led home ownership programs, and conducted financial literacy workshops. Nasser graduated from the University of Minnesota with a triple major in sociology, political science, and African American African studies. I'm also an Afro grad. And he's a 2014-15 Humphrey Institute of Public Affairs Policy Fellows. And he also is a former board member and chair for the council. So we're excited to welcome our family back into this space for this presentation. And then also we have Michael Wall, who is a voter outreach specialist with the Office of Minnesota Secretary of State Steve Simon. And what that means is that he gets to spend his days connecting people to the power of our representative democracy and their place in it, helping people learn and utilize the registration and voting processes, and generally feeling that he is so lucky to be supporting the idea that your vote is your voice. His background is in secondary education and relationship development, and he pines for the time that he and his family will own dogs. So thank you, Michael, for joining us as well. And just as a reminder, we are on Facebook. We are also in the chat here on the WebEx platform, and we are looking at all of our platforms where we are streaming for your questions. So throughout this presentation, please share as many questions that you may possibly have, so that when we get through the presentation, we can take your questions at the end with our audience Q&A portion. So please think of any and everything you want to know about voting in 2020, how to expand access to the vote, how to make sure people are able to vote safely in this election season. So I'm gonna stop talking and I'm gonna turn it over to our facilitators today.
All right. Thank you, Amber, and thank you so much, the council, for organizing this event. And I want to thank Chair Nita Hughes as well. And it was good serving with you. And I want to say one thing before I jump into Michael. I really enjoy what the council is becoming, because the council is becoming a resource for communities. When I was serving on the council, we were not quite there, but I think now I see that the council is really becoming a resource for community, because communities are coming to see the council as the place where they can find their resources, including voter education, which Michael and I will be running. And thank you for that. Go ahead, Michael.
Thanks, Nasser. Thank you to the council for having us. It's a great opportunity. And what we are going to do is to try and give you resources. Some of it is going to be specific, the how-tos of applying for an absentee ballot, or how you fill out the ballot once it comes, and what are all those envelopes for. And some are kind of 10,000 feet, why is voting important? But hopefully, as you think about voting and you talk to others about voting this year and beyond, these will be tools for you to answer questions, to be of service to others and to our system, to our democracy. And we look forward to your questions. We may go through some parts of this kind of quickly, but Amber has the deck of slides. I think Shakira might have said something about posting it, but you will have access to it, so you can get to us. You can see the particulars, any links, etc. So you don't have to write anything down. But we look forward to your questions at the end, and we'll try to leave as much time as we can for those questions. PowerPoint has a problem opening this presentation in a browser. Uh-oh. Hang on. Are you still able to see the screen, Nasser? To see the PowerPoint?
Yes, we can still see.
You can see. All right. Let me see if I can do it in this format.
Okay.
Yes. Nope. Nope. Doesn't like it.
You want to try downloading? And then
Yeah.
I can try queue it up too.
Yeah, if you've got it, that would be great.
Okay. Queue it up. Or yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So let me stop sharing then.
And yeah, and just switch. Yep. Perfect. All right. We are good to go.
All right. Sorry about that. So I'll just say next screen.
Yes, I got you.
Next, please.
All right.
Great. So you heard some of this from Secretary Simon. We are encouraging voting from home. We'll talk about that a fair amount today and how that works. It's not a mandate. Every Minnesotan has the right to vote in person if they want, but we are asking people to consider voting from home. And I don't think Secretary Simon talked about this, but there are places that still need poll workers or need kind of backup what if poll workers. So consider calling your city or your county to be involved as a poll worker, and you can do it as young as 16 years old. Thank you. Next. Resources abound. There are lots of resources, and we'll touch on some to know not only who's running and get information on them, but also the particulars of how do I do something? Where's the form for that? How do I find out more information on this thing? Our website, and I'm not kidding when I say on the screen, it's amazing how much is there. We have a great website full of information. And if you can't find it, give us a call and we'll probably be able to tell you where it is on the website. We have that much stuff. Next, please. Yep. These are just some particulars that we're pointing out. Secretary Simon talked about tracking your ballot. You can also check your registration. Those forms are great. You do have to be careful to match exactly what's in your record. Again, if you can't find something or something doesn't work, give us or your county a call and we will help you out. Next, please. Some of the particulars that are helpful for people who are looking forward to a particular election are what's on the ballot. You can see your sample ballot, which is wonderful. And one of the rights that people have that they may not know about, given that our ballots are extra long and both sides, is that you can bring, not only you have the right under Minnesota law to bring a sample ballot that you've marked up into the polling place with you. So use that. You don't have to remember who you wanted to vote for. Take the time you need, do your research, mark your sample ballot, and then just use it as a guide when either the real ballot comes or when you go to vote early in person or on November 3rd at your polling place. Applications online and paper, different languages. We have a ton. Next, please, Amber. And part of that ton are what we call fact sheets. They're half sheets, so 8.5 by 5.5. They're printed on both sides, and they get into more detail on about a dozen different subjects, all having to do with voting and elections. Knowing your rights, taking time off of work, which is another right under law, how to register when you go to vote if you're not registered already, all of these. And on the left side, all of those are offered in a dozen different languages. We actually just added a 13th, and we're putting links to those up this week, and that's in ASL. That's our 13th language, and we are expanding those. We're very excited about that. But not only can you see these and print them and download them, but you can order many of them on the same page. You just click and we'll send you things for free if you're having an event, if you want to hand them out to people, whatever. Next, please. And we have a weekly, we were telling Amber about this beforehand. We have a weekly conversation that we do on Zoom. And it is a conversation. It's people asking questions. I heard this. I saw this posted on Facebook. Some guy at the barbershop told me, you can't do that. If you need a place to ask those kinds of questions and you'd rather not just call a faceless phone number, and your county elections office and our elections line, great people. But if you're more comfortable with Zoom, you want a chance to hear other people's questions and the answers to them, please join us every Friday through the election and probably past the election from 10 to 11 a.m. You don't have to stay the whole time. So that information is there, as well as reaching out to us. Please feel free. Next, please. So if you are talking to people, especially two groups, young people who are just getting eligible to vote or might have just become eligible in the last couple of years, and people who have never voted before. And one of my favorite calls that I received about a week and a half ago was an 83-year-old woman who was registering to vote for the first time. It was so cool. So if you're talking to someone whose response may be, what do I care? What's the difference? Why should I vote? Traditionally, if you took a civics class in high school or there was some kind of assembly, they might have talked about that first group on this page, why it's important to vote. And these are all great. You're in a democracy, so it's your duty, right? You're a part of this system, so you should do it. People have fought and died for your right to vote. You could live in a country where you don't have that right. Those are all great, and they're very traditional. But what we tend to focus more on now is the idea that voting gets you what you want, what you see as important. So as you develop your own sense of what's important in life and what you see as necessary for people in your community, people in your country, whatever level, human rights, getting that into practice, part of that is voting for people who are going to make those laws and make those policies that back up what you think is important. And that is voting. And that's a great reason to vote. Your voice is amplified if the people representing you believe what you believe and fight for what you find important and what you're fighting for. Nasser, did you want to?
Yeah, you go ahead. I'll jump in.
Okay. The last part of this page is just Secretary Simon says anytime you leave something valuable out and walk away, what's probably going to happen is that somebody else is going to grab it. Your vote is the same thing. Don't leave it on the table. Don't let somebody else's voice be louder because you're not speaking up, because they will. Their vote will count more the fewer votes are cast. So don't leave it on the table. And this quote I love: everyone's vote is equal until you don't use it. Nasser, what do you got, sir?
So I think one thing that I want to say is that most of the time people don't really see the connection between voting and the power that they have, but they have to understand that because a minute that I always say this, a minute that you forget to feed your meter, you are interacting with your local government, and you want to make sure that that local government is the reflection of your voice and reflection of your votes. And whoever is in that position, in the mayor's position or city council, or sometimes people really think the president is too far from them, and that is like really something that they may not understand quite and not connected to them on a daily basis. But think about local government, the school board, city council, county commission. These are the people who make policies that you interact every day. So I think this is really important that people need to understand and see the connection between what they do and who are making those policies at every step of government.
Thanks, Nasser. That's an excellent, excellent point. Next one, please, Amber. So, general numbers, yes, Election Day is November 3rd, but as Nasser likes to say, it's as much the last day you can vote as it is voting day. In Minnesota, you've got 46 days to vote early, and some people started walking in to early voting sites on Friday, September 18th. That's the first day you could get your ballot. Some people were mailed out their ballot on the 18th from their county because they had requested it a week or a month or 3 months, even longer before. So voting is happening now. And if you're wondering what's on your ballot, on our website, mnvotes.org, you can click on what's on my ballot, and you'll see not only a list of the positions, the offices, and the list of people on the ballot running for each office, but if they gave us, when they filed, a website to be able to see more about what they believe, that link will be there. If they didn't give it to us, you may have to do some Googling, but so you can see exactly what's on your ballot. And if you click on the Show My Sample Ballot, it will look exactly like what you see. One of the reasons we hear, and studies have shown the same thing, one of the two big reasons why people don't vote the first time, one, and Nasser and I talk about this all the time, is no one asks them. The assumption that, of course, you'll vote is just wrong. If you don't come from a culture of voting, somebody needs to say, hey, have you voted? Do you know how to vote? What can I tell you? You know, what can I share with you? You want to come with me? So asking is one, and I just hinted at the other, that lots of people don't feel that they've been told how to vote. And because they don't, frankly, want to look stupid, they don't want to walk into a polling place and literally have no idea what to do, they don't go. So giving people information, letting them, in this case, see their sample ballot so that they can not only be familiar with the way it's laid out, but to be able, and I've heard this reaction, I work with young people a lot in this job, but I hear the reaction all the time, is that it? I just have to fill in bubbles? I thought it was going to be this complicated thing. No, It's like a standardized test, right? You're just filling in the bubble next to your choice. So every opportunity to share details with people and make them more comfortable is going to make it more likely that they vote that first time. And people who vote at the first opportunity when they first become eligible, studies have shown are much more likely to continue to vote and be lifelong voters. Next one, please, Amber. So what's the key? What's that first step? Is register. Register first, register now is kind of our, our chant, but it's because for people who have never voted before, it puts their foot on the path. It's that first step. And you can tell people, register. It doesn't obligate you. You don't have to vote, but you'll be prepared. You can walk into the polling place on November 3rd. If that's the day that something strikes you, yep, I want to cast my vote. And it's as simple as giving your name, looking at your information to make sure it's true and it's right for you, and signing that oath saying, yep, that's me, and this is all correct, and you get your ballot. It's that simple if you're already registered. And as you'll see in a second with absentee ballots, it's much easier this year if you're registered to vote, because normally you would need a witness. You would need someone who is a registered voter to see your information, to know it's you, to sign. And especially during the virus, there are a lot of people who don't want to interact with others. This year, you don't need a witness if you're already registered when you request that absentee ballot. And we'll show you the difference between the absentee ballot packet you get when you're registered and those requirements, and the one you get if you're not registered and those requirements. So register, paper form. We can mail you one. Your county can mail you one. You can print it or download it off of our website or mnvotes.org. You'll probably hear that like 25 times today. It's fast and easy, and it goes directly to your county. No printing, no mailing, no postage.
Michael, can I hop in with a question related to
Anytime. Yep, please.
Applications being mailed? And I know I emailed Nasser a little bit about this, but there was a recent court case that talked about ballot applications being sent to all eligible voters. Can you all talk about that for this particular election?
Well, I can't talk about a court case in particular unless it's been settled, but I can tell you.
Yeah, I think it's been settled, and I think Nasser can hop in on this too if he has more information.
Yeah, so Michael, just kind of, this is, I'm sure she is referring to the absentee ballot application that we sent out to, I would say more than 2 million people that we sent out the absentee ballot application. And because at the beginning of the session, when the pandemic hit the state, our office tried to introduce legislation and make Minnesota all ballot voting state, but that didn't go through. It failed somehow. It went through the House, I believe, and then it fell in the Senate. So the only option that we had was that what else can we do to inform and encourage people to request absentee ballot? So we came up with the idea of, sending out the absentee ballot application to all Minnesota registered Minnesotans, because we could do that legally, but. So we cannot send the ballot to unsolicited voter, because the structure in the state is that, and there's an exception to that, which I will say, the state is structured in a way that you have to request the absentee ballot. The voter needs to initiate that request, and that is up to voter. But we don't want to sit around and wait for a voter to request that. So we just made sure that people can really fill out that absentee ballot application and mail back to us. And that ballot, the mail includes the prepaid envelope as well, and also encouraging them or telling them how to request online as well. So that is what it is. And then there's exception to the voter soliciting the absentee ballot. There are, if the precinct has less than 500 registered voter, that is not in mainly like in metro area. Mostly that is in, I would say, like outside of the metro. So if the precinct has less than 500 registered voter, so the county will conduct the election in that precinct completely by mail.
They can choose to. Yeah.
Yep. So they can choose to do that. Except in that case, but other than that, the voter needs to request absentee ballot.
Yeah, there really are three ways to vote in Minnesota. One is you go to your polling place. One is, just like Nasser was talking about, you're in a small precinct which has chosen, or a county which has chosen to do all mail balloting, where every registered voter, you've got to be registered, automatically gets their ballot sent to them for every election. Or you vote with an absentee ballot that, as Nasser said, you've got to ask for. So getting applications, and there are lots of groups, and I have 5 envelopes at my house from different groups who have just sent out applications, encouraging, Nasser's got a handful of them too. But if you get an absentee ballot application from some group, it's perfectly legal. And even if you have already requested your absentee ballot, we like to say, think of it like credit cards. If you get credit card applications and you decide, okay, I'm going to get this Citibank Visa, I don't get paid to endorse, I just thought of that. So you get your credit card and you keep getting credit card applications. It doesn't mean you didn't get your credit card. It just means that other people are trying to get you to have a credit card and they don't know what you have. So don't worry if you get additional copies of the application. If you want to use the one online, go right there. It's what we suggest anyway at mnvotes.org. Or if you've sent in one, use that ballot tracker that Secretary Simon talked about, and we'll have the link for it in a minute, and check to make sure that your application got there, along with have they sent it out and have they received it and has your vote been counted. Those 4 things are able to be tracked. But it's a great question about who can get an application, who can get a ballot. Let's see. So we talked about registration. You can register when you vote. That's the last option for registration. We talked about online and paper, but either when you're voting absentee, and we'll talk about that in a second, or when you go to the polling place, if you're not registered because you've never registered, or because you moved or changed your name, or you just got off paper, you were convicted of a felony, and then you've served all of the time outside of prison and inside, and you're eligible again, any of those scenarios where you have to register that day, you can do it in Minnesota. It means you're never cut off from the ability to vote just because you're not registered by a particular date. You do need to show documents that prove both who you are and where you live, and we'll talk about some of those examples in a second. Next, please. Polling places will be open, and polling places, both early in-person voting and the polling place on November 3rd in each precinct, they have accessible options for people, including ballot marking machines. Minnesota is a paper ballot state. Every single voter, whether you're talking about someone who lives overseas, an active duty military person who's stationed away from their precinct, anybody, college student who's going to school out of state, however you vote in Minnesota, you end up with a paper ballot that is counted in a tabulator, in a machine that counts. And then the counties hold on to those paper ballots for almost 2 years. So that's what we do. And if you need help marking that ballot in private, there are machines to do that. We've got other voting assist tools like curbside voting. On election day, if you want election judges to come out and bring you your ballot because you can't get into the polling place for some kind of health reason, they do that too. So there are things to help. And Secretary Simon talked about polling places and masks, et cetera, and wiping down surfaces. You can always reduce the amount of time you spend at a polling place by being prepared, making sure you're registered ahead of time, making sure you know where your polling place is, because they do change. And this year, if your traditional polling place was in a place like a school or a senior center or an apartment building, it may not be there this year. So always check your polling place before you leave the house. These things can make your time in the polling place, if that's where you choose to vote, shorter. But as we're going to get into now, you don't have to go to your polling place. You can vote from the comfort and safety of your own home or vote early at some sites we'll talk about in a second, with hopefully shorter lines and less time waiting. Next one, please, Amber. So absentee ballots, we talked about anything outside of your polling place on election day. Those are considered absentee ballots. When can you request one? You can request one all the way up to November 2nd, the day before the election. The key, though, is given the method that you're turning in your application, because as Nasser said, if you want an absentee ballot, you must apply for one. Do you have enough time to get it back, vote, and get it in by the deadline? If you're doing it in person on November 2nd, if you're in an early voting location, no problem, because you're going to hand them the form. They're going to check you out. They're going to hand you back your ballot packet. You're going to go off to the side if you want, right there, vote, put it in the envelopes, hand it back. Done. But if you mail in on November 2nd an absentee ballot application, you're never going to have the time. So the key is how much time do you have left and what methods are you going to use? Next, please, Amber. We talked about the postmark by November 3rd. Secretary Simon did, as long as it's received by November 10th. You can also hand in your ballot, your absentee ballot, whether it gets mailed to you or not, by 3 p.m. on election day at your county elections office. And if your early voting center that you are eligible to go to is open on election day by 3 p.m., otherwise you can hand it in at your early voting site up until the 2nd, if they're only open until the 2nd. But there are hand in person options if you don't want to or don't have time to mail it back. And if you, I was talking to a voter in Florida who didn't want to just put it in the regular mail. So we talked about the levels of mail that things are signed, or you could FedEx or UPS it. And that's got to be before the office closes on November 3rd that those show up. Secretary Simon also talked about you can have someone else hand in your ballot for you. It's a limit of 3 in Minnesota. So for that particular election, doesn't matter when it is, you can take up to 3 ballots for people to the mailbox, to the post office, or to turn it in person. If you're going to turn it in person, you need a photo ID. They'll take your information and the information on the people that you're handling ballots for, just as kind of a tracking security thing. Next, please. We talked about tracking your ballot. We talked about what you can track. There's the link. Next, please. The ways to apply are paper and online. We recommend online. You do require an email address for any of the online applications, and you need either a state ID number or a social security number. And if you're missing any of those two, and the ID is one and the email is the other, you can use a paper form, and not a problem. The paper forms can be handed in. They can be mailed in, they can be faxed in, and they can be attached to an email. There are lots of ways to get this absentee ballot application in. And that's different from a registration form that has to be either handed in or mailed in. Next, please. When you apply for an absentee ballot, know that voting on an absentee ballot is the same as voting on a ballot on election day, and the requirements to vote are the same. Citizenship, being 18, being a Minnesotan, having a residence here for at least 20 days before the election. All those things are exactly the same. Next, please. We talked a little bit before, and I'll just repeat when we were talking about registration. The process to apply for an absentee ballot is the same if you're registered or not registered, but what you're going to have to do when the ballot comes to you will be different if you're registered or not registered. It's easier. The short sentence is it's simpler and easier if you're already registered before you apply for that absentee ballot. And you'll see some of this in a second. Next, please. So left-hand side is the paper ballot, absentee ballot application. Right-hand side is the online. It asks you, next please, the exact same 7 things. It's about you. Who are you? What's your ID? Your birthday? Where do you live? All about you. It asks you your identification numbers. If you want it sent somewhere different than where you live, it'll ask that. And then on both forms of the application, you'll need to swear that everything you said is true and that you are the person you're saying, and that you understand it's a felony if it isn't true, if you're lying or doing any of this on purpose. Next, please. And you can keep going through these, Ambers, through these slides with parts of the application. It just shows you where these things are. You can keep going. Yep. We'll stop at the one that has the signature, which I think is coming up. One more, maybe. Yep. So you have to sign the paper form and you have to do a digital signature on the application form online. But it's still legally binding. It's really exactly the same thing. Next, please. The back of the paper form has a lot of great information for people. And next, please. Including, and I always like to focus in on this, that for people who either by disability or because of their literacy can't sign a name, don't want to sign a name, they have a stamp. Some people have a legal stamp. Some people make a mark. All of those are legal and perfectly fine and acceptable. It's what the individual does as a signature or in place of a signature. That's all that's required, including if you're in the same place, the same location, you can direct as a voter someone else to sign for you, to sign your signature for you. As long as you're in the same place, you have that right. Next, please. We talked about, you can go to the next one, how you can turn in those paper applications. So what do you get when that absentee ballot comes? How do you fill it out? How do you make sure it's accepted? Next, please. We actually, I don't know if we talked about it, but in 2020 only, you don't need a witness. You normally do for an absentee ballot. You would have someone who's a registered voter in Minnesota sign on your signature envelope saying, yes, I know this is, I've seen ID if they need to, that this is Amber Jones, this is Nasser Musa, whoever is filling it out. The voter signs that signature envelope, but so does the witness. This year only, if you're already registered, another benefit of registering, you don't need a witness. No witness required. You sign, you make sure your information is right, and you mail it in yourself. So you only need a witness if you're not registered when you request that absentee ballot. Next, please. What do you get? Well, if you're registered, you're going to get your ballot. You're going to get 3 envelopes, and we'll see pictures of them in a second, and you're going to get a set of directions, which we'll show you in a second. If you're unregistered, not only will you also receive a voter registration application, a paper one, but you'll also get a different signature envelope with a bunch of check boxes because your witness needs to see the documents, the same ones you would show at the polling place if you were registering. We talked about election day registration. For someone using an absentee ballot, this is election day. And they'll also get different directions. Next, please. Here are the 3 envelopes. Top left that says ballot envelope. We also call the privacy envelope. As soon as someone fills out their ballot, it gets tucked in there. And then that goes in the signature envelope. You can see the fields that need to be completed. A lot of people have a sticker up where it says voter name and voter address that the county puts on there. Check and make sure that anything that's required of you is done, because that is one of the major reasons that there's something on that signature envelope that wasn't done that's required, that ballots are rejected. If it happens, though, your county will reach out and notify you if there's any time for you to vote at your polling place, to vote early in person, or they may mail you another ballot with a letter saying you never signed it, you need to do another one. It depends on how much time there is. That signature envelope, when you're ready, goes in the mailing envelope, and every county prints their address and the return address on these envelopes. Next, please. So you'll know where it goes, and you'll know if you want to drop it off in person, it tells you where on the outside of that envelope. So here's an example of directions for registered voters. It's like, buying one of those kits to put together a dresser. It tells you in the gray background area, what did you receive in the envelope? So you make sure it's all there. And what are you going to need? You're going to need a black ink pen. You're going to need an ID number. Next one, please. Oh, and they're numbered too. So it says, number 1, do this. Number 2, do that. And you can go through this. You can see that it continues with the numbers. Next one, please. And one after another, just follow those directions. If you're a non-registered voter, you'll see that this gray background box is a little bigger, because not only do you get an additional form, but you have additional things you need to do. So, and have your witness do. Next one, please. Next one. Next one. This is a list of ways that non-registered voters can prove to their witness the documents they can show them. And you can see this on our website under Election Day registration. Next one, please. So there are lots of choices there. We talked about tracking. Next one, please. And we talked about the deadline too and how you can get it in. Next one, please. Up until the end of business at your county elections office 2 weeks before, so this is October 20th this year, you can change your mind. If you're holding back on sending in your absentee ballot because you're wondering if something's going to happen, up until 2 weeks before, you can contact your county either by email, and they'll email you back asking for proof that it's you, or by phone, or you can go in and say, this candidate just said something that really just angered me. I don't want to vote for them anymore. I want you to pull my absentee ballot, because they're not a big pile of ballots, in a room. They are filed so they can pull them for you, and they'll cancel that ballot and give you another one to vote again. Up until 2 weeks before next time, please. And when you do that cancellation, they'll tell you what your options are for voting. That's what we've got. Nasser, anything to add before we start taking questions? Great.
We're good, Michael.
Yeah.
We're good.
We've also got slides on researching candidates and getting nonpartisan information. We've got lots of stuff that we can help you out with.
So the only thing that I muted myself, sorry. So the only thing that I want to say is that as Michael talked about a lot of our resources on our website, specifically all those fact sheets, we converted them into video in at least in 8 languages. And those videos are coming out because we know that some communities consume information through oral communication. We just want to make sure that we balance that gap between communities that consume information in written form and also in video format. So we those videos are finalized and they are about to come out today. And I will send you, Amber, as soon as we get them. Yeah, so that you can share with the council and share with the community members to make sure it gets to the right people.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael and Nasser. So we're going to take some questions. And so please hop in the chat if you have any questions regarding voting in 2020 and elections process. We'll get started with a couple of questions just to make sure we have some information on the record. So we are in a season of quote unquote early voting. So what we talked a lot about, the message a lot has been about voting by mail, and how that's still accessible throughout this entire early voting season before election day. But if someone wants to if someone doesn't want to vote by mail at all, they just want to vote in person, what do they need to know? If they've already registered, they just want to go vote in person. Like, where do they go to vote? And what's the deadline to go vote early in person if they don't want to go on election day?
Awesome. I'm going to start this off. Nasser, tell me if I miss anything or you've got something to add. So we do, Amber, you're right. We spend more time on the particulars of getting a ballot sent to your house, because when you go to vote early in person, you've got staff and election judges there to walk you through it. So the process is actually, I would say, in some ways it's exactly the same. You have to fill out the same absentee ballot application, but you just hand it to somebody. And then when they hand you your ballot, instead of mailing it to you, you've got the same set of directions. You've got the same envelopes, but you can say, I don't remember which number I wrote in my application. You've got people to turn to. So in that way, it's a little better to have those people there. The places you can go and the deadline for doing this early in person, generally, if you consider it November 2nd, the day before election, the places you can go, every county is required to have at least one place to vote early. That is the county elections office. Am I cutting out? Am I all right? Oh, okay. The county elections office, and you can see that list on our website, mnvotes.org. You can just search for county and elections, or under other ways to vote, you'll see a link to see the list, but all 87 county addresses are there. That's one. But a lot of counties have a number of places you can go. In a place like Ramsey County, they have 3 places that everyone in the county can go. One is in Roseville, the library. One is the election center and Plato Boulevard in St. Paul. And then there's one, I don't remember where the third one is. And then they've got at least a couple that are based in cities and only for the people in those cities. So they're run by city clerks, and those offices have all of the precinct ballots just for their city. In a place like Hennepin County, I think I only know of one, and Nasser, you can correct me, but Hennepin County Elections is one place that anybody in the county can go. But if, for instance, you live in Minneapolis, there's also the Minneapolis Elections and Voter Services Center, new building, 980 East Hennepin. So depending on where you are, Brooklyn Center has Brooklyn Center Town Hall, City Hall. You can go there if you live in Brooklyn Center, but if you don't, you can go downtown Minneapolis to the county. So you've always got one, and you may have at least 2, if not more, places you can go.
Awesome. And if people want to vote in person, when is the deadline to be able to do that?
November 2nd.
To vote early in person?
Yep, you can walk in the day before elections, and you had said, what if you're already registered? It's easy because you don't need anything. You walk into one of those places you're eligible to do all the way up until November 2nd and say, here to vote. They'll give you the form if you haven't filled one out, and then you'll do that same process.
Awesome. So we have a question that came in from the chat, and it says, can you talk about what happens when the polls close on election day? So if I'm not mistaken, they're open 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. on November 3rd, correct? So if you are in line by 8 p.m., will you still be able to vote?
Yeah, that's the law, actually. It's not just practice in Minnesota. It's one of the Voters' Bill of Rights, which is a Minnesota statute, which you can see on our website. We also have a fact sheet of all of those rights laid out. But at 8 p.m., an election judge gets into line. They get in the back of the line with a sign that says basically end of the line. And anybody who steps up after that cannot get in that line. But no matter how long that line is, anyone in front of that election judge, and they don't step in at 7:59, they're not allowed to, but anyone in front of them, no matter how long that line is, they vote that night. At 8 p.m., well, at 8 p.m. is that official close, right? Nobody else can get in line. But after everyone is through voting, every precinct gets together the votes, the total, and transmits that to the county. And the county puts together that with all of the absentee votes that have been turned into the county by election day. And they all get counted together at the same time. The county checks it out and they send it to us. So we get these 87 collections of votes in the evening as soon as they're ready, county by county. And it's for local elections, statewide elections, everything. And then we put all those together. Our office doesn't send out a ballot, doesn't count a ballot. We don't count anything. We don't own election equipment, nothing. It's all done on the county and city level, which we love. It's local control. The ballots that come in, the absentee ballots that come in just for this election, because as Secretary Simon said, we don't do this normally, but from the 4th to the 10th, that total, as long as those absentee ballots arrive by the 10th and have a postmark no later than the 3rd, those will be added up at the end of the day on the 10th and then added to the totals from the 3rd. No one on November 7th is going to say, okay, we got enough for this person to win. That's not the way it is. And it's the same way as absentee ballots are counted before election night, starting 2 weeks before that same date that is the last date you can change your ballot, have it spoiled. And that is the day. The reason you can't do it anymore is because that's when the county starts to open those envelopes, separate them for privacy. Because remember, what's in the signature envelope has no markings, no identification. So they have a pile of these signature envelopes with barcodes and addresses and names, and they're empty at this point. And then they have the privacy envelopes. They open those, make a pile of ballots, no identification on them at all, and they feed them in starting 2 weeks before. Those votes aren't looked at. Nobody, a week in to that 2 week period, nobody looks at it and says, oh, candidate X is ahead. Nobody looks at it. So although the machine is counting votes, nobody has a sense at all until 8 p.m. on election night when those are added to precinct totals. I hope that answers that person's question.
Thank you. Yes, it does. So another question that I have is a little bit about like during the application process that you like if you want to do like an absentee voter application, you mentioned that if you want to do it online, you'll need an email address. But then you would also need an ID, like a state ID number or a social. So just to dig into that a little bit more, do you need a driver's license or ID Minnesota-based to vote in Minnesota? And if you don't have one, what do you need instead to verify your identity?
So in Minnesota, you don't need either, but it's the standard. Most people who are eligible to vote have a social security number. The Minnesota state ID number and a license, a learner's permit, a tribal ID, all of these have these state issued ID numbers. That's one of the choices that you have when you register to vote or when you apply for an absentee ballot. The other one, though, is for people, and the requirement is a current state issued photo ID. So it might be a license, it might be a state ID that's not for driving, the permit that we talked about. Any of those need to be current to register you to be a part of that voter registration or the absentee ballot request. If you don't have a current one or don't have one at all, then there is always a choice that says, I don't have that. And you put in the last 4 digits of your social security number. And it's a part of doing one of two things. One is checking that you are who you say you are. And the other is if you've moved, if you've changed your name, if you have registered before, they will find the you with that ID number where you registered before and take your new registration, bring them together. So if you live in 7 different places over 25 years or 50 years, you don't want to have 7 different voter records. Nobody wants that for you. So they'll match it, they'll update it, and they'll show that update in your voter record, and you'll just have one.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. I have a couple of other quick questions. So I know that in one of the slides, it mentioned eligibility and how that related to prior felony convictions. So
Yep.
Can you please just quickly talk about who is eligible to vote in Minnesota if they've had a prior felony conviction?
Definitely. And I want to take this one, Nasser, if you don't mind, because I was just a part of an awesome event on National Voter Registration Day on the 22nd that was run by the Federal Probation and Parole Department, Minnesota District. And what they did is they said there are too many ex-felons, let's call them that, people who were convicted of a felony, who served their time, who served any kind of supervised release like probation or parole, and either don't know that they can vote now or don't know how. So they said, let's get places around the state all in one day, all at the same time, and allow people to come ask questions, register to vote, get help if they want help, apply for an absentee ballot if they want to do that, find their polling place. All of this for people that, for one reason or another, didn't have their right to vote for a while and may not know how to do it. So it was a great event. We actually held a Zoom room that same day to be an online resource. So what Minnesota law says is that when you have satisfied the time elements of a felony sentence, so you've been convicted, you're sentenced, you're given a certain amount of time in prison that you may or may not serve all of, and then you're given probation or parole, some kind of supervised release. Minnesota law says when you're done with all of that, and the term is off paper, when you're off paper, you can register and vote just like anybody else. One of the big questions that came up this year because of a case in Florida was, well, what if the person still owes money? In Minnesota, doesn't matter. It's just the time elements. So if you have fees, if you were ordered to pay restitution to somebody, but you have served that time, somebody's still coming after you for that money, but it has nothing to do with your right to vote. It's just like if you owe money to somebody or a company or you go bankrupt, whatever it is, it has no effect on your voting. Same thing with felons who have come off paper.
Nasser's like, thumbs up. Great answer. And we did see that event. We publicized it. Some of the local fraternities and churches were a part of that event. So it was really great to see that being done. So thanks for that. I got probably like 3 more questions that I want to make sure we get to before we close. So another question, we've seen an increase in homelessness, in housing insecurity. And I wanted to make sure we had a question about, for those who are housing insecure, like how does Minnesota ensure that their right to vote is still intact? Do you need like a current address? What does it look like to vote when you may be housing insecure?
Nasser, you or me? Who do you want to start this one?
I can go ahead and get started. This is a little bit complicated. In Minnesota, people do have the right to vote regardless of where they live, or regardless of whether they have a house or don't have a place to live, because the law allows them to say, I slept last night under the bridge between this street and that street. And they can come, describe the location, register that way on election day, and vote that way. But it's a little bit complicated because they do have to verify, who they say they are. If they register in advance, let's say they register in advance saying, I live under the bridge between this street and that street. Because the post office cannot send the mail to that location. So for that reason, the voter registration on the voter registration roster, it says challenged. So that means they do have to come to the polling place, to sign oath and say who they say they are. There's another level to that as well. If someone who lives in the precinct knows those people who live in under the bridge somewhere somehow, a registered voter in precinct can take them to the polling place and vouch for up to 8 people. That's another thing. But that does not apply to if, let's say, 30 people live in shelter. So a person who lives in the shelter, an employee of that shelter, can take all of those people who live in that shelter if they are eligible to vote. The particular employee can take that 30 people who live there, take them to the polling place, vouch for them in that way. But it's just a little bit, there's some complexity around it. And Michael, you might add something here and there.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add to that is that if we want to draw a line between people who have nowhere to stay, so they're sleeping in a car or they're sleeping in a park, a situation like Nasser was saying, and people who are either in a temporary shelter or sleeping on somebody's couch or on their floor, if they are somewhere that's not their place, but it's where they are sleeping, and that place can accept mail on their behalf, they can register fully. Because the part that gets you challenged is not that you are sleeping in the park at Hamlin and University. That's not it. It's that the postcard that the county sends to verify, and this is the postcard that you think is this nice, you've been registered and here's where your polling place is. That's not actually why they send that postcard. They send it to verify you actually live at that place. So if I'm sleeping on my friend's floor and I can get mail there, I can register there. And as long as that postcard doesn't get sent back, then I'm fully registered. And on election day or early voting, I can walk in and give my name and verify the information and vote. No ID that shows what my address is, because the postcard already verified that that's my address, and the county has already verified who I am by using one of those ID numbers. We have been working with shelters trying to encourage and work out ways that shelters can accept mail, and a lot of them don't, for people who stay there. And maybe they stay a week and then it's required that they don't stay there a week and then they come back. There are lots of different circumstances. But if somebody stays and the shelter has a system of accepting mail for them that they can come and get, they can register fully And then if they want to use, for instance, an absentee ballot, they can have that absentee ballot sent anywhere they want. It doesn't have to be to that same address. So Catholic Charities, for instance, has a series of community centers that help the homeless. And one of the things they do is take mail for them. And in that case, the absentee ballot can be sent there. They can not only pick it up there, but they'll get help filling it out if they need it. So complicated, as Nasser said, but lots of different possibilities.
And options.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, I got a couple more questions. So I wanted to ask this question because it kind of came up in some of the debates earlier this week. But there was kind of some encouragement from a presidential candidate for their supporters to watch the polls on election day. And I just wanted to have a conversation briefly or to answer the question, what is poll watching and what are Minnesota's laws about poll watching on election day?
Who wants to start? Nasser, you.
Yeah, I can go ahead and get started. There is a specific law in Minnesota regarding the polling place, who can have access to polling place and who cannot have access to polling place. So the parties can designate or appoint a poll watcher, specifically someone who will be, at the polling place kind of looking at it's some sort of irregularity to challenge someone that they may know do not live in the precinct. Let's say, for example, I used to live in Minneapolis for a decade and I moved out. And then my neighbors know that I moved out and that I don't live in Minneapolis. And then if I come back to my old neighborhood and try to vote there, someone would say, I know you don't live in this precinct because I've seen you moved out. I know you moved out. And that challenge has to be based on credential and personal knowledge and the personal, factual information. That is one way. And then the other thing is that who can have access to polling place and who cannot have access to polling place. 100 feet away from the polling place, you could do anything. You can hang around there and watch people move in, or you can have the sign or whatever. But that has to be 100 feet away from the polling place. You cannot have access to the polling location within 100 feet in the campaign or harass people in that manner. So that is what the law is structured to do now. Anyone can stand outside a polling place 100 feet away, like I said, do anything.
And the only thing I would add to that, two things. One is that actually we have a term for it in Minnesota. We don't even call them poll watchers. We call them challengers. And Nasser talked about the requirements for challenging. But the other thing to know is that another kind of challenger is any registered voter who's in the polling place. So Nasser was talking about his neighbor. If he went back to his Minneapolis neighborhood, it wouldn't necessarily be an appointee of one of the major political parties who would know, but his old neighbors would know. So if you're in there to vote, you are a challenger, you can be a challenger too. What you can't do is say, I voted, now I'm going to hang out and watch for people who don't belong here. Not allowed. As Nasser said, there are particular people who are allowed in the polling place. And by the way, the police aren't allowed to stand in the polling place or to be within 100 feet unless they are requested by people in the polling place to come in and help with something. So you'll never find a police officer at the door because some people are intimidated by the police being there for no reason. So at my polling place in the east side of St. Paul, oftentimes I'll see a police car about 125, 150 feet away, but they don't get out of their car, basically. They're there just in case. They're called on, but they can't go in unless they're asked to do it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that information. So people know their rights at polling places, in particular, if they're going to go on election day to vote, knowing, the measures in place in our laws to make sure that voting is safe, it's not an intimidating process, things of that nature. So we really want to make sure that information is laid out. And then I know we're at 1:30. I just wanted to make sure we talked a lot about voting. But if you could just briefly talk about why it's important to also consider being an election judge and working on election day at the polls, especially given how the COVID-19 pandemic may be shifting the demographics for who is applying to be an elections judge.
Let me throw out a couple of things, and then Nasser will throw out a couple of things. But one is that the people who serve as election judges and poll workers, same thing in Minnesota, we use both terms, but many of them are 65, 70, 75 years old or older. It is an old crop of people, these 30,000 people we need for every election to keep the polling places open. And because of COVID-19, a number of them, a good percentage of them, have said, I don't feel comfortable. I don't want to sit there for 16 hours inside with hundreds or 1,000 people coming in. That it just isn't safe enough for me, so I'm not going to do it this year, including the mother of our chief of staff who's been doing it for decades, and she's not doing it this year. So we do need people who feel more physically comfortable to do it, to do that work. And one of the reasons it's really important, I mean, it's great to be an election judge. It helps the system work. It allows people to vote. I mean, all of that is great. But if we don't have enough election judges, then we have to take, let's say you need 10 for a polling place to run well. If there are 5 in one and 5 in another, they're going to create a single polling place that those 10 can work, but you're also going to bring in twice the number of people to that polling place. In Wisconsin, they went from, in one city, was it 170, Nasser, to 5. This was in March for the presidential primary. And if you can imagine the number of people assigned to those 5 polling places to cover all of the people who would have been in the 100 plus. So having enough election judges means all of the polling places are open, which means a minimal number of people at each polling place possible. Did I miss anything, Nasser?
No, I think that's really good, Michael. So I think the other thing is that one thing that I just want to point out is that our democracy cannot and would not function without election judges. Simply look, it's that way. Because it's structured that way, if we are completely moved to all mail-in balloting, then we may not need election judges. But I think as of now, as it's structured, as long as polling places are open, we need election judges, and that our democracy cannot function without election judges because they are the front line of our democracy.
Thank you so much. I really want to make sure you briefly touched on that and to really encourage people, if you are feeling physically able to do what you can for this election season to serve in any way that works best for you, but to also consider being an election judge as an option to care for our most vulnerable, to make sure that we are ensuring access to the vote while also caring for those most vulnerable among us. Michael,
may I say one more thing about election judge needs?
Absolutely.
The 2 categories that are most needed in the metro area, at least, one is people who speak more than one language. And we're not talking about being fluent in Greek or Latin, but if you speak the language of your neighborhood, of your community, in addition to English, it's a huge help to have election judges who can help explain in someone's first language. So that's a big thing. And interestingly, some places, their big need is election judges, adults need to declare which major political party they're affiliated with. And they can also declare that they're not affiliated with any of them. So the DFL has in a number of metro locations, especially larger counties, has the most election judges who have said, well, of the major parties, I affiliate with the DFL. But anytime there's a job that requires 2 election judges, they have to be differently
Different
affiliated.
parts.
So if you are someone who is fully independent and doesn't identify with those 4, or you do affiliate with one of the other 3 major parties other than the DFL, you are needed because balance in the polling place is really important. Thank you. I just wanted to add that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. Thank you. Oh, my goodness. We had such a great conversation, so much information. I just want to thank you, Michael. Thank you, Nasser, and thank you to the secretary for joining us. I want to continue to all that the landing place, the go-to place, if you don't remember anything else about how to access information about voting, mnvotes.org. That is the shorthand link that will take you to the landing page for everything voting elections at the Secretary of State's office. It can reroute you to local pages needed to find like your elections, your early election centers, where you register to vote, where you request absentee ballots, where you can track your ballot, you can look up sample ballots, where you can research candidates. So all the information you need, mnvotes.org. Please, 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 if you don't commit anything else to memory, commit that to memory. So thank you so much, Nasser. Thank you so much, Michael. And thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in to our workshop on behalf of the Council for Minnesotans of African Heritage. Coming up this month, we do have our October council meeting, which is on the second Tuesday, October 13th. So we will have more information going out. We really like to use that space to invite community in. If you want to share public comment on any issues that are affecting your community, anything you will want the council to know. And we also bring in special guests from throughout the state system, commissioners and leaders throughout the state to also be able to present to us on work that is relevant to our lives as well. And so please, please, please consider tuning into one of those meetings as well. So if there aren't any final words, we can log. But thank you so much. Have a great afternoon. And please go out and vote. Vote early. Encourage your loved ones to vote. Share one thing you learned today with someone just in common conversation about voting. And that's how we are going to continue to expand access to the vote here in Minnesota. Thank you. Have a good afternoon.